everybody. Welcome to our stress break for today. Today's stress break is going to focus on boundaries. So we're going to look at what boundaries are, what boundaries you might need to implement, and then tips and tricks on how to do that successfully. So to start out with, most people think about boundaries as saying no, as telling people what you're not going to do, and focused on kind of that negative aspect. But to me, I think that's a bit of a misinterpretation of what boundaries are. If we think about boundaries on a soccer field, it just separates out what is a part of the field and what's not, right? And so we can focus on what is not a part of the field, or we can focus on what's a part of the field. I think for most people, when they hear about boundaries, they immediately think of what's not a part of the field, and that's where their mind goes. And today I want us to focus on boundaries as talking about what do we really need to be healthy and to be successful, and focusing on that positive attribute. So that's how we'll go through boundaries once we get to that point in the activity. The thing about boundaries is that they help us to be safe. And they help us by allowing us not to be on at all times. And so when you're in an environment where you feel safe, you know what to expect, and you have some control, you don't have to hold yourself tense at every moment, ready and waiting for something to happen, right? You know you're in a safe environment, so you can relax. And it does a lot to help us be in a stress-free or reduced stress mindset during these days. There is a need to have good boundaries all the time, but especially with everything going on with COVID-19, we are often working in different places we haven't before and spending time doing some different tasks. So I think now more than ever, setting positive boundaries is an important feature of being in a healthy place. I work with kids often, and there's a large conversation with children around setting healthy boundaries for them. And actually, when kids don't have healthy boundaries, they push back, because they want to have that sense of that limit, because it helps them to feel safe. And I think as adults, sometimes we don't think enough about how much it helps us to feel safe when we have appropriate boundaries. So why we're talking about boundaries is that without them, it's hard to say yes continually. It's hard to stay being able to be there and be supportive for people if our boundaries are continuously being overrun. So we're thinking about boundaries so we can say yes and be supportive in the long term to people, so that we can feel safe and so that we can reduce our stress. So the first thing that we're going to do to try to explore what boundaries we need is to try to take a minute and think, what do I need over the next 4 days, over the Easter break here, to have this be a rejuvenating or healing or healthy break? And it's not that we're going to be able to do every single one of these things that we think about, but I want us to just spend 30 seconds or a minute sitting and thinking, what could this look like if it was really going to be focused around my health in a good way? So if you have the time, I'd please like to ask that you either close your eyes or sit back in your chair. I'll put 30 seconds on the clock. Feel free to pause the video if you'd like to take more. And I want us to identify what are some areas that could allow us to feel like we have a break. And some tips or some suggestions if you're not sure kind of going into it. It could be that, maybe I don't check work, maybe I don't solve work problems, maybe I take an hour for myself, right? What is it that we're going to have to do? So do you want time away from work? Do you want time to yourself? What would help be healing for you? So we'll take 30 seconds and a bit more if you need it, and we'll think about and identify what are some of the positive things I could look forward to this weekend, so this could be healthy for me. And we'll overcome boundaries from there. If you could please take notes, or if you have a really good memory, that'll work as well. We'll start now. All right, great. That's our time. So if you have a real need to put some boundaries in place, that 30 seconds might have been enough to identify a few things you really hope to have this weekend. And if you're doing pretty good, it might take a little while longer to come out. So feel free to take a little bit more time if you need to identify what could I look forward to for this weekend. For myself, something that came to mind was I would look forward to 4 days in a row where I don't have to be right. It's not that I'm right all the time at work, but I do have this sense that I need to be doing the best that I can. And I think that if this weekend I could let go of that and have space where it's okay that I mess up and it's not that bad, if I shovel slightly less efficiently than normal, that's really okay. That would be a positive for me. So now what I'd like us to do is, with that list that you created or just in your head, I want us to identify what boundaries would allow us to achieve those positives. So for my boundary, allowing myself to be imperfect and to kind of mess up a bit for these next 4 days, there's a couple of things that I need to put in place. So one, I need to not be working. So I need to make sure that I've turned my cell phone off. I need to make sure that I've turned my computer off. I need to make sure that I am disconnected from work. Second, I need to remind myself that it's okay to be imperfect. This is more of a mental boundary for myself, but I need to remind myself that even though I want to do well at things, that I've decided this weekend what will be positive for me is to have just some space away from those expectations. So those would be my two boundaries that I put in place. I put a boundary to not check work and to not be looking at work. And I'd also put a mental boundary for myself that if I notice myself having this sense of expectations or perfectionism creeping in, that I could take a deep breath and I could let that go. So please pause the video and take a little bit of time to identify from that initial list that we created for what you need to be healthy and rejuvenated this weekend. And then what boundaries can you put in place that'll help you achieve that? And these can be goals. Like I was saying before, this could be, you don't check work, don't think about work problems, take an hour for yourself, things like that. It's okay if you don't do these things perfectly, but by us taking a bit of time to identify what we need, it's much more likely we'll be able to put some of those things into practice. So the last part, now that we have our list, and now that we've been able to identify some boundaries you need to put in place to be successful, the last thing is just a few tips and tricks on how to make this stuff work. First of all, boundaries are hard to maintain. They are for everybody, and it's okay that they're imperfect. I think when we have really rigid boundaries, it can be difficult sometimes to have things work with people who are also trying to set their boundaries in place. So some flexibility is really, really useful, although I know that there's certain boundaries that are rigid and should be. So what we're going to go through is just a few easy ways to try to implement this. So the first way that I think would be important is to close the loop. So this is specifically thinking about work. We have 4 days off, we've been solving lots of problems, we want to take this time to rejuvenate, right? And so for me, closing the loop, we'll be leaving today, Thursday, with stuff still to do, right? We're not going to finish everything we need to do and start work all anew on Tuesday. There's going to be continuing projects and things going on. So what I like to do, so that I'm not thinking about this stuff afterwards, is to write down, here's what I have to do. And I write it down so that I don't have to hold it in my head. And I find that works really, really well for letting things go in that way. So what I like to do is I like to look at what am I going to need to do in the next week, or at least on Tuesday. Okay, is there anything that I can finish right now so it's not hanging over my head? If not, is there a plan I can put in place to finish it? And then I write it all out. And sometimes that plan can simply be, think for half an hour on Tuesday about this problem. But because I've written it down, I no longer have to hold that emotion that there's a problem to be resolved in my mind or in my heart. I've written it down, I don't know the solution, but I know how I'm going to find it, which is taking a half an hour on Tuesday. And so when I say plan, I don't mean that you plan out the solution to all these problems, but often for me enough is just to plan out the time that I'm going to start to look at these problems again, or try to do some brainstorming or something like that. So finish what you can, plan what you can't, write it down, and so that when the thought pops in your head or you get nerves to think about it, you think, oh, I've already resolved this problem for myself for this weekend, and you're able to let it go much more easily. So that's my first recommendation from a work standpoint, to put those boundaries in place. The second is about our family and about people we're around. I think that it's important that we communicate our needs, and if we do that beforehand, it's much more likely that we're going to be successful. Let's say you and your partner both wake up on Friday. One person is imagining that you're just going to take the whole weekend to relax, just read books and watch movies together or something like that. And the other person thinks, finally, we're able to get all this housework done and catch up, and we're going to have such a clean house, this will be so good. Both of those activities are really healthy, right? And there's times we need to just relax and take time for ourselves. And there's times where contributing to the how nice our environment is a really healthy thing too. But if those two people both expect the other person's going to think the same way as them on Friday morning, that's going to be a bit of a hard way to wake up and a hard way to get into the day. And we can often feel like our needs aren't being met by other people when they don't know about them, and we don't know about theirs, and they contradict. So a way around that is to try to communicate. And so if you know that for yourself, you want an hour by yourself or a day by yourself this weekend or something like that, I would really suggest communicating that with your partner or your children or your friends prior to the time that you need it. I think that little bit of lead time helps everybody. If you need to adjust a little bit to fit with them, if they need to adjust to fit with you, it gives everybody that time. So that'd be my second recommendation, is to communicate your needs to people around you. The third is that we know we can't anticipate everything that's going to come up for ourselves. And so I recommend having a safe word or a code word, something like that, around your house, so that if you ever find, whoa, I just need a break from things, or I just need some space, you're able to do that by using the code word. And so whatever it is that you make it, it's just important to have a collective understanding. So again, what happens when you use this code word? Can you use it, I don't know, when your son or daughter needs to get changed, or there's times where it's not okay to dip out? Having some of these preliminary conversations with your partner, children, friends can be a really helpful piece in when things happen, even unexpected things, knowing how to deal with it together. Because you put some tracks in place and then you start to go down them. So those would be my 3 recommendations. A final comment as well about work and about boundaries in general is that our body reacts to consistency and it reacts to space. So if you're able to, and I know this is a common recommendation, but if you're able to work in a space that you can close the door afterwards or you can change the space, I really recommend it. Even something like having a couch that you work on, if you have a blanket, you can take your blanket off. When you're done work, put it on when you are. So you can have some sort of cue for your mind to let you know, hey, this is work. And then when you're done, hey, this is not work. Because keeping those boundaries and separation within our homes is difficult. We're not used to it, and also it's challenging because there is that crossover. So that would be a recommendation for that. So thinking about if we have a tough time emotionally putting boundaries in place. I know that we have a lot of different expectations on us. Some people have a lot of expectations, whether it be a caretaker, somebody who's struggling around them. And so what you might be able to put in place is very different. But I think for all of us, when we feel that we should be doing something over the weekend or over a time where we've tried to put in some space for ourselves, asking ourselves, is this a priority? Is this non-negotiable? And is this a should? And I think that there are things that they're a priority and they're non-negotiable and we need to do them. And we need to find a way to do them in a healthy way. And our boundary has to be more about finding a way to do it healthily than not doing it. But there's other items that maybe you don't have to do. And if you give yourself just that time to say, is this a priority? Is this negotiable? And is this a should? It helps us be able to process those things. And also, just to be clear, a should does not count as a priority or a non-negotiable. That's just the perfectionism creeping in and our expectations. And it's important that we work in our very best way possible to fight against those things. So I hope today has been helpful for you. I hope you've been able to identify some positives that you're looking forward to in this weekend and some boundaries so that you can successfully do that. And I also hope that we take a break, don't think about anything we don't need to for a few days and have it be rejuvenating for us. So thanks very much, and I'll see you again on Tuesday for our next stress break. Bye.